If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are men in the trades, forging health in the drug poisoning crisis. This is
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
Just a quick trigger warning to start. At the end of this incredible conversation, there is some open discussion about people our supers have lost to suicide. If this just isn't for you today, take care of yourself and come back to this episode on another day. Otherwise, buckle up for our Superintendent Summit. We are here to discuss Superintendent Summit, and we have a couple of superintendents with us. Trevor Botkin's back with us again.
Yeah, happy to be here, Karen. Thank you for having me.
And we've got Duncan Jordan with us, who is actively a superintendent right now. He's actually on holidays today. So thanks for being with us on your holidays, Duncan.
You're welcome. It's a good time for me to do it, because if it was not during holidays, I probably wouldn't have the time.
You wouldn't. Like, I literally could barely even contact you to talk about doing this episode today, because you're just so fucking busy when you're on site. And we also have Shane Sewell with us. And Shane was saying when we were getting on our call, he was like, Duncan is on the phone constantly, because it looked like you were trying to connect, Duncan, and I was trying to phone you, like, why can't you connect? But your phone line was busy, and Shane was like, he is constantly on the phone. So thank you, Shane, for being back with us as well. Shane's a CSO.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest from service providers and the construction sector in getting through to men, and how to lead them to a safer place. Their mental health and the substance use and all that. And maybe that's just a great place to start it.
There's so many things that can happen to people in construction with just the stress at work, and that causes a lot of people to get into drugs. We've seen it. We've had to remove people from the job site that have been high at work. We've had to, we've noticed a lot of people that have showed up hungover who we've had to send home. That type of stuff is literally a daily occurrence.
None of this conversation is going to condone accepting people on job sites in less than satisfactory condition for work. I anticipate we're going to talk a lot about understanding construction workers and how hard the job is and the psychological aspect to it, and how we work a lot of the time kind of in the deep end as far as physical capacity and mental capacity. And sometimes it can sound like we're trying to justify people's poor condition, but really, I think the conversation for me is how do you lead people safely so they don't have to be in that condition at work? And if we do have to send them home, how do we do that in a way that builds them up rather than tears them down? You know what I mean?
Definitely. And we try to do that when we have those situations at work. I never like to find somebody in disrepair and send them home feeling like shit. To me, it's more about like, what can we try to do to help get this person set up for success? We care a lot. I can say that about myself and my fellow supers that work under me and Shane. We care a lot about the people that we have on our sites. We want them to go home safely at the end of the day. And that also involves them being fit for duty. And if they're not, you got to try not to hold it against them. Sometimes it's hard, especially if it's a repeat scenario, someone that's had these problems over and over again. But at the same breath, you don't want to send somebody further down a rough road. You want them to feel like they can get through it and come back and have something to offer.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely different levels to this, isn't there? I mean, there's the guy that's occasional, and then there's a guy condition. It becomes very consistent, and those are the people I worry about a lot, right? Because it's like there is fit for work on that day, and then there's fit for work in the industry. And for me personally, there was a time where I could string together many days where I was fit for work. There also came a shift in my mental health and my substance use where I just couldn't be counted on. And that's a different, stronger conversation, right? That needs to happen. There needs to be greater interventions. And I'm not saying the industry needs to do that or be responsible for those interventions, but we spend all the best hours of our lives on those job sites. So there's got to be some empathy and at least setting options in front of people. So hopefully they can take them.
Yeah, well, it's definitely getting better within the industry. I think
it is shifting.
WorkSafe's bringing a lot more light to the mental health side of things. Movember has
Yeah.
helped. It really has, with mental health and having these mental health awareness months. It's all starting to trend in the right direction. But back then, it was so different. It was so different, even like that was only 20 years ago when I first started in construction full time, 21 years ago. And it was totally, totally different. Like guys would show up hungover and be, oh, I'm just feeling like shit. I'm hungover today. Sorry, I can't get too much work done or whatever. I remember like guys saying this stuff to my dad when I first
We'd
started
work
working
around
with him.
it.
Oh yeah, he'd be like, okay, well, you know what? Here's the keys to my truck. You go have yourself a sleep, have yourself a nap, and hopefully you'll feel better when you wake up. If you don't, then go home and come back tomorrow and show up better fit, right? And just the mental side of things were way different too back then. It was, I don't know how many times I was told when I was cleaning up garbage around the job site that I'd make a great wife one day.
Totally.
Stuff like that, like the verbal harassment back then was like,
But it was
just
kind of, part of it, right? Like it was part of the experience. And like, it wasn't even, for me, it wasn't something I toughed out and just got through. Like that actually was part of what I loved. Like I loved that jarring back and forth, and I really fit into that, like I dished out as much as I took in, really, after and I understand it's not this experience for everybody. In those days, it was like a rite of passage, and I felt like I belonged, because it's like, somebody calls you, hey, shithead, and you're like, I got a nickname now, and it didn't hit me hard. Like but looking back, like not everybody, not like a lot of people suffered in that, and at my hands too,
Yeah,
and this idea that we've got to pay our dues, right? And but why? Like my question now is, and I used to live it, right? Like, pay, everybody's got to earn their keep around here. I'm like, why do we have to pay our dues? Like, why can't a person just come onto our job site, learn how to do the job safely, put in their time, and go home, collect their paycheck, and enjoy their families? Why do you have to put up with a set amount, somebody else's determined amount of shit and abuse to be belong or fit in on this job site, this place of employment?
That's so true. And it's still like that with some people. We still have a lot of people in the industry that are like that. And
that's the challenge for both them and for the next generation. Because I don't know, like what I see is right now an industry that's like this right now. You've got an old guard, my age and older, that are maybe a little younger than me and older, that are like, these young people don't want to work. And these young people are coming in and saying, it's not that. I'm just not going to sacrifice my back, my mind, my whole life for a job. And
that they're not going to take the verbal abuse.
No.
Right.
And they're not wrong. They are not wrong. There is no justifiable reason why that can't be true. And the old guard is being asked to change. And now I have empathy for them, because they're in a business that, let's face it, they're not like my second job. I wasn't going to be like, I don't want to be in this industry anymore. I'm going to go be a doctor or a lawyer, right? This is a place that for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. And so now I'm starting not to recognize it. I don't know if you haven't gone through what maybe Shane and I have gone through with, like feeling uncomfortable and changing, and then it can be very hard.
That's what made it work for me, was because construction, there was a lot of people like me.
Yeah.
Right. And I could relate to these people. And when I met somebody with addiction issues or can't make it on to work on time issues, I could relate to that. It just seems like, it was a safe place. It was the banter. It was the camaraderie of working in construction.
And the toughness. Because I knew all those people that used to pick on me growing up, I knew they couldn't last 5 minutes on a job site. And I loved it there, right? Like, so I felt, like I said, it felt like I was part of the underdog story, right? Like, here we are, this motley crew, this rough and tough gangly gang, and we come out here and we hang out and we get each other, we can rip each other, but we, there's a camaraderie, and we do this job that is so physically demanding and emotionally exhausting that other people just can't do, and I always felt like I had one up over the people that sort of, for lack of a better word, abused me growing up, because I knew they had those cushy jobs, or they were you know, and I'm like, yeah, what do you guys know, right?
There's still so many issues with the industry though, and like you said, the change of the guard with the baby boomers now moving out and the younger generations moving in. I still feel like, I don't want to sound like the old school guy here, but I do feel like there's a lot of work ethic that has to change. You know, Trevor, you were saying that why do people have to earn their due, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? But the fact of the matter is that they still do at times, no matter what. Yes, everybody should be able to come and show up to a job site and go to work and learn the job and learn how to do it effectively and safely and productively to make their paycheck, to make the company they're working for a few bucks. Because
Yep.
if they're not making any money,
Nope.
we're not going to have jobs, right?
Always have to accept that. You
Yeah,
are working for a company that needs to be profitable.
but at the end of the day, they have to take the time to learn, and it's still a business of what have you done for me lately? And that's the
Yes.
unfortunate thing about construction. It's never about, oh, this guy's made us tons of money over the last 10 years. It's like, what the fuck did you do last week? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what? Oh, you fucked up last week and you cost the company $5,000. We don't fucking care anymore that you made us millions of dollars over the last 10
Yeah.
years,
Isn't it
right?
incredible? Like nobody stops and goes,
And I hate to laugh
something
about it
seems to
too.
have shifted with Mike.
Yeah.
Maybe we should go and talk to Mike and see what's going on for him. You know?
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where we as leaders, though, we really have to try to help the guys along with that and help them
Yes.
through things like that, so that they stay, the biggest part is so that they stay mentally stable. Obviously, safety number one. We don't want people getting hurt physically, but the mental aspect of it is quickly becoming number two. We don't want them to
No.
suffer mentally, right?
You know, I think there's an unreasonable expectation on both sides. And I think in the long term, you see the industry is going to have to accept that production's going to look different if we're going to keep people safe and productive. But there are a lot of people that need to understand, like, this is never going to be an easy job.
No, there's just so many things that affect it all the time.
Well, and I even wonder about, like, with the housing announcements that were made in British Columbia a few months back, and I can't remember what the numbers were now, but they're going to have X amount of more houses built in the next 18 months. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, 100% we need it. We're in a huge housing crisis, right?
Yeah,
It's so acute. But who's going to build them?
This all falls down on the guy in the steel toe boots with the leather worn off the steel tips. I mean, when the province is making, let's not mince words, when the province is making those commitments and employers are stepping up to fill that demand, the weight of that burden is falling squarely on the shoulders of the guys with the hammers and the drills and wearing those aprons, right? Like, it's and then looking after them largely falls on site superintendents and CSOs.
It's tough. Like we end up putting in a lot of long days. Honestly, that's why I took a month off. Like, I've never, especially doing the high rise, I've never worked so many hours in my life with the Saturdays. I mean, Shane and I have had to be on the job site on Sundays over these last couple of years, getting our first tower finished off, and those hours wear down on you big time.
That's so much pressure. Like, I try and describe to people what it's like being a superintendent, and like, there are so many moving parts. There are so many sub trades to keep track of. And I don't know about you, Duncan, but the amount of sub trades that drop their crews off, get them started, and then expect the superintendent to be their foreman, right? Like, the questions I get all day where I'm like, why are you coming to me? Call your foreman. Oh, he's off site. I don't care. But then if they get wrong information, it comes back on you too. Like, the littlest mistakes, the budget, like,
you still have to deal with it. It's all my
responsibility as a super. Like,
yeah,
you still have to deal with it.
Yeah, no matter what it is, you still end up having to deal with it. You can tell somebody to do something 10 fucking times and they still do it wrong, and then you still got to go deal with the problem that comes up after. You can tell their boss 10 times and their boss doesn't relay it to the worker, and the worker still comes to ask the questions.
It goes my fucking Saturday.
It just fucking absolutely drives me insane sometimes. It's
but I'm like,
it's part of the job. You have to be a special breed to deal with that type of stuff and to actually be successful at it.
Well, and that's That's why I say like superintendents are so powerful when it comes to dealing with this workforce and getting through to them. Like when we're talking about the toxic drug crisis, they have a loyalty to getting the job done that puts blinders on them, right? Like these guys will just get heads down and going in a direction, and they'll run into concrete walls if they're not, if somebody's not like, hey, you better look up, right? Like they just want to get it done. They want to, production matters. They know that the success of the project and the company is sort of on their backs. And the people that I see them respect consistently the most are the superintendents. The superintendent's still that guy that's one of you, right? It's still that guy that like's been there, done that. He's stood in your shoes. He's not the office guy. And we're usually guys with big personalities, big enough to lead these other guys with strong, huge personalities. When I say no, that's not going to be that way, it's going to be this way, they tend to listen because they know I'm going to take responsibility for it too, right?
Once you're the guy making the call, if anything goes wrong, you're the guy taking the shit when it hits the fan.
That's right. And so I think superintendents really are like really in prime position to start changing the dialogue around mental health on job sites and substance use, start moving these guys in a more positive direction where they're looking out for one another, because they already are. I mean, that's the amazing thing. On so many different levels, these guys, like I don't know about you, but when I have a crew that's like really joined up and come together, the banter is solid. These guys, they know what each other's doing. They know each other's kids' names. Like they are looking out for each other, but there's certain ways guys fall down that other guys, I think they fear, or it maybe shines a light on them and they start pushing it away a little bit, or they just don't ask good questions.
There are some companies and some trades that are definitely a bit better at looking out for each other and their fellow workers and following proper safe work procedures. But then there's others, like you say, where they're heads down, ass up, trying to get the job done no matter what it takes, and ignoring safety, ignoring well-being, mental well-being, ignoring being fit for duty, whether it's mentally or physically. And that falls back on guys like me and Shane.
And I think like what you're saying is like, we've got long days. We have so much to do. We can only spend so much time on, say, this one guy that's here hungover or has been consistent. My rebuttal is also, this isn't something we solve in a day. This is a culture we create on job sites. If we're intuitive like you are and empathic, if we're caring about the individuals and building them up to be better individuals rather than more productive ones, we're creating a culture that's gonna, these guys are surrounded by other guys that are looking out for them too, and not just us. It doesn't all just fall on our shoulders. Yeah, I'm not there to be a psychologist or a counselor. I mean, that's just not my job. But when I build a crew and an environment on my job site where people feel seen and heard and feel like they can come to me and say, look, man, things aren't going well. And me saying, look, let's shorten this week up. Can I give you Friday off? Would that help? When I can start managing what they need, proactively, it just becomes so effortless almost, right? Like it's just something that's happening in everything I do and every decision I make. But it took a lot of outside help and therapy and rehab to get me to this place where I understand those things now. And that's not something that's afforded to superintendents. And, let's not forget, at the center of this conversation really is this. Look at the graphs and the charts and the numbers. More people in construction are dying of overdoses than any other employment sector in Western Canada, probably the country. And so it's like, to me, the mental health conversation is like, how are we talking to these guys? When we hear about an overdose, I automatically, even my mind goes to addiction, and it must have been terrible, and it must have been, a terrible path. But there's this other huge number of guys that don't have a problem. They go out on a Saturday, or a Friday night after work, they grab a gram, they cut loose with the friends. And unfortunately, the consequence of that, everything in their life could be fucking beautiful. They get that one gram that's got fentanyl in it, and now they've paid the ultimate consequence, and so is their family, and so is the contractor. It's easier for our minds to go to this thing is like, we've got people that are sick and are suffering from substance use disorders, and their lives are going downhill, and this is the ultimate conclusion. But there's this whole other bunch of people that just had no idea this was even a possibility or haven't accepted that. And what are we doing on job sites to sort of like make sure people are taking the proper precautions. Like we drum it into people. Don't drink and drive. Don't drink and drive. Don't drink and drive. I can't even bring out a flat of beer for the guys on job sites at Friday. The liabilities are too huge now.
Yeah.
We can't have guys having a beer at the site and get an accident.
No.
So we know what the culture is around these guys. How do we lead them into a place where they're protected as much as possible and the consequences of their actions are front of mind, and not to scare them, because you're never going to scare these guys out of it. But I believe we can lead them into a place where they understand, like, okay, do I have naloxone? Do I know how to use it if my buddy goes down? Because these guys aren't overdosing on job sites. I
think the younger generation moving into the industry is a little bit easier to train in that aspect, and that we do, if we use it right, we do have the empowerment to actually change the industry there a bit, to make it at the forefront of their minds. And that's literally just having those conversations. It's talking about it all the time. It's bringing it up in your toolbox talks, your monthly safety meetings. It's having stuff posted on your safety board. It's making sure that you discuss those things in your safety orientations with the workers on site.
If you get through to a couple of the old stubborn bastards like me, and who have the ear of other stubborn bastards, and we start walking a different line and using different language and talking a different way, like, I'll tell you, I'm proud of it, but it's also a burden. I'm very well aware that I can change the energy in a room. And you know it too. You're a superintendent. How do you not know it? I can walk in and people say, well, how do you get through these guys? And I'm like, just like this. Watch, you guys, this is the way we're going to do it. Okay. And they respect that directness and openness. And I think when they see other strong personalities and leadership marching to a different beat and inviting them into that space, like to step up and be part of solutions, be a strong leader. We need to look after these guys. You need to look after the guys around you on the weekends, guy. Grab a naloxone kit. I'll show you how to make it. If you've got a guy carrying a naloxone kit in his truck willingly because he feels like he's part of a solution and taking care of other men, you've just saved lives. Whether they ever use that or not, you've got a guy out there in the community. He's taking personal responsibility for people being okay.
Well, and that's what we do, right? Like I actually carry a naloxone kit in my glove box in my truck. I've told the guys that before. I know Shane has one in the first aid trailer. Like, we have to make sure that we keep those things around, especially working in a downtown city core environment where never mind the workers on site, you could have any random person having an overdose up right next to your site. But and we've had that on our site, and Shane's been the first guy there to help somebody as opposed to the paramedics. I've literally called Shane and asked him to come out and help people before, because I've seen them, and I can't just turn a blind eye to it and walk away.
Nobody should.
And that's a big part of it is getting people to be on board with that, like to getting all construction workers to actually stop and help. Like, don't walk away. Don't just turn a blind eye to somebody doing something stupid on safety. Don't turn a blind eye to somebody showing up to work high or drunk or hungover, or drinking on site. Like,
I'm not hearing in the news about a lot of job site industries and catastrophes that are directly pinned back to drug use or alcohol. I'm not hearing about overdoses on job sites. I'm hearing about guys that are going out after work, cutting loose with their friends, often using alone, or in a group of people that aren't empowered and are freaked out. They don't know what to do and lack the awareness to intervene to save that life, or they're in a place where there's no other person to intervene or save their life, and they haven't taken any precautions in using alone to be able to better ensure a positive outcome.
Well, that's a lot of the problem with using drugs, like hard drugs in this time period, is, when I was out there using, sure, I probably had some experiences with some bad drugs that I got, but nothing like today, whereas one hit, one score that ends up taking us out in the end. We don't even think about consequences.
I thought I had it all worked out. I thought it wasn't going to happen to me because I buy from a boutique dealer. This guy cares about his clients. He checks all his shit. I was thoroughly convinced that any sort of interaction with toxic drug supply was beneath where I'm at. That's just not where I operate.
Yeah.
I get my stuff really far upstream. I get my, like, all this
Yeah.
nonsense,
Yeah.
you
It's
know, and I
just this
hear it from
fantasy,
guys. What's
right?
that?
Just a fantasy of
Oh,
we
big
have
time,
all the
No
control.
shit.
We know who
big
our
time.
dealers are. Yeah.
Well, everybody knows somebody now as
Yeah.
well, I think.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
those are the stories that we have to also share. I feel like it's good to share stories
Yeah.
about people who have overdosed and passed away. Things like that. This is why you don't do these things, right? And to educate people. That's the biggest thing. It's like education is huge. If people aren't educated, they're going to make the mistakes. If they're not educated about how to do something safely, they're going to do it wrong and hurt themselves. If they're not educated about drugs, they're going to do something there and hurt themselves.
How do you guys regulate yourselves? Meaning, how do, like, you know, if Duncan, if you're looking on the bright side, like, you know, there's days I'm sure where it's nothing but shit all day long. It's just a shit show, shit storm, shit sandwich, everything, shit buffet all day long. And like, how do you co-regulate off of that? And, you know, how do you take care of yourself?
Things could almost always be worse, right? If you're above ground, things can always be worse.
What's the foundation of your gratitude?
100%. So that's one way I try to look on the bright side, and as well as just having my family to look up to and to know that they're there for me when I come home. And then there's also you have to have other people that you can vent to, that you can
Talk about it.
you can talk about the problems at work. You can talk about what's stressing you out. You can get it off your chest. I don't like to tell my wife everything I go through, because she has a stressful job too. And I don't want her to have to go through that. I bring up some stuff with her, but I talk to my dad a lot. I talk to my brother a lot. Sometimes I'll bring it up, my issues up with Shane at work. I'll vent to Shane. You have to be able to get it off your chest. You can't just bottle it up.
You know, the greatest indicator of kind of where I was and where I've got to was when I just recently lost my mom. And, you know, things would shift with her health, like they would deteriorate. And then I'd get into this panic state where I felt very like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And and then I'd go to bed, and the next morning I would be back to good. And I started paying attention to this. I'm like, so every time there was a shift, I was like, oh yeah, here's that feeling again. I know it'll be gone by morning, right? And then the next morning, I would be back to like, okay, now we're just going to deal with this. And so it's a weird thing when you become aware of those patterns in yourself and you're able to just like let them go, like accept them and not fight back. And that really is a product of the last 5 years of my life, and something I'm very grateful for, because it's allowed me to get through some tough stuff.
The old saying, sleep on it, is really good. It's really a good saying. One of the things that I've over the years that's motivated me to try to help people. And one of the things that happened when I was younger is we had this carpenter when I used to work for my dad in my early 20s, this older carpenter, his name was Dwayne. I learned a lot from him, and we moved on to a different company. My brother, one of my older brothers, and my dad, we all knew this guy. And after about 6-7 years in the industry, we were doing different things. We were all doing different things. And Dwayne tried to reach out to all three of us because he didn't have any work. And Dwayne was an alcoholic and a drug user as well. I think cocaine was his number one thing outside of the alcohol. And he couldn't get us. We were at the time I'd lost my Oma, and we were dealing with her passing and going up for her funeral and stuff, and out of town. And Dwayne couldn't get a hold of us, and he left us all messages, and none of us got back to him. And a few days later, he took his own life.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So that motivated me to like always like give it a little extra effort to help people, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's all it takes is for you to spend 5 minutes talking to somebody,
Yeah.
to move them away from doing something like that, right?
Mhm.
And that I think back to quite a bit when I'm trying to help people out at work, and that's one thing that I do for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're
And
hard
I
work
like to share
people.
his story. That's one of the stories I like to share with people.
Well, I appreciate you did that because I've got a Dwayne. I got a Dwayne on my resume too, and it's something I live with. I try not to. I don't beat myself up over it anymore, but it's definitely something that motivates me to keep talking and yeah, just keep connecting with people because it can be life or death. You never know when it's going to be, but that 5 extra minutes you spend just that, hey, dude, like something seems off, or hey, I recognize you're trying to get a hold of me. What's going on?
Yeah.
Can we do this now, or can we do this tomorrow? Like it's yeah, it's tough. And when you're in the moment, you don't have that. You just don't realize it's gonna be the last time you talk to them or the last opportunity or why
No.
they've reached out to you, but
And that's the
know,
thing. He reached out
yeah,
to
man.
me. He reached out to my dad. He reached out to my
Yeah.
brother, right? And he was trying to get help. He was
Yeah.
trying to reach out to people. Like you said,
Well, you
I
probably
can't.
didn't realize that in the moment, right?
No, of course
Like
not. No.
if he hadn't taken his life, you would have thought you guys all missed his call, and that would have been
Yeah.
the end of it, right? Like so, it's too easy to look back and then add a sense of like I woulda, shoulda, coulda to a
Yeah.
moment when you really didn't know. There's no way you're gonna know the outcome.
Yeah.
No,
But there's
you
still a
just don't.
valuable lesson, right? Yeah.
You don't. Like I recently also just lost my mother-in-law's boyfriend. I was one of the last people he spoke to. This is just a few months ago, like,
Yeah. Wow.
and he was going through substance abuse as well. And like I spoke to him on that Friday, and he took his life that Friday night. I knew he was in a rough spot, and
Yeah.
I spoke to him over the phone a few days beforehand, and I spoke to him in person on that Friday. And I mean, I did what I could. I'm not holding myself at all any
No, you can't.
responsibility over it. I feel bad, of course.
Yeah.
I was upset, yes. As we said earlier, in the industry, people just need to learn that they got to stop sometimes to help people out.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
It takes a village.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's just always being aware that that's a possibility, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like I don't feel like people are always on that edge. I'm just like, I remind myself like this moment could mean a lot to this person. Like my interaction right now could affect them in a way. So I'm going to show up as my best right now, or try to.
Mhm.
Certainly not perfect at it, but
Yeah. Duncan, we just released Jason's story yesterday, and Jason talks about losing his father-in-law in 2020 to suicide. And that's one of the things that drives him in this project. And to talk about men's mental health. And his father-in-law was a tradesperson but just didn't talk to anybody. Had a drinking buddy, but they didn't actually talk about anything ever. It's interesting. Like I'm continually hearing this theme or these experiences emerge, and I'll go somewhere way woo-woo and I might chop it out. But with this project, with all the people, with all the guys in construction that have passed from drug poisoning or accidental overdose, there's a feeling this project should have died a couple of different times, and it didn't. And the way that it's unfolded, and somebody involved with the project said at one point, it almost feels like all the people that have passed their energy is driving this forward to start preventing it, to start to slow down all these deaths. And that's the role that we play in it. And so it's not much comfort when you've lost somebody, but to me, it makes meaning out of it a little bit, in that what we're left here now, we're still waking up today, and we can carry on just like you told, your story. That's how they're still contributing. They're still helping. They're still here with us, and they're still connected to all of this. So, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, call 988, Canada's National Suicide Crisis Line. Call in for yourself or call in with your friend who's struggling. Many of us in the Off the Clock Toolbox Talk community know these feelings and are sending out the love and hope we needed in those times to you. Off the Clock Toolbox Talk has been a Fraser House Society project, executive produced and co-hosted by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution from Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. Special thanks to our valued partner, ICBA Wellness. The Independent Contractors Business Association Wellness Program is working with Off the Clock Toolbox Talk to develop on-site and online resources that make sense for you and your crew. ICBA.ca. Help save lives. Go to tradespodcast.com and click on the link under Enter to win a $200 grocery card. When you fill out the survey, you help us understand what's working and what's not. Each survey for each episode listened to is a separate entry. Information collected is for survey purposes only and is not shared. Help us help you.